Everyone, I'm Dean Obeidallah. There's an issue that demands much more attention than it's getting by the media. It's an issue that Mark Zaid, who many of you know is a well-established attorney, national security area, called the most un-American thing he's ever seen. Yes, the most un-American thing he has seen. And what is it? What this is that Donald Trump is taking a page from Richard Nixon's playbook of weaponizing the government to screw his political enemies in ways we've never seen before. This is far worse than what Nixon did. And let me explain what I'm talking about. It all began 2 weeks ago, almost under the radar, just a little bit of coverage. Donald Trump signed an executive order to punish a law firm called Covington in Berlin. It's in Washington, D.C., well-connected, democratically linked law firm. And what he did is he took the security clearance away from the lawyers who work at that firm. That affects their business. Many of the lawyers work in the area of national security, classified documents. Now they can't represent clients in that area. Why did Donald Trump order that the security clearance of the leading attorneys of that firm be struck down and revoked? Did they take classified documents and store it at their house, like in their bathroom, like Donald Trump did? Did they violate the espionage numerous times like Donald Trump did? No. The only thing the lawyers at Covington and Burlington did that upset Donald Trump was they provided free legal advice to former special counsel Jack Smith. Yes, let me repeat that. All they did was provide free legal advice to Jack Smith because Jack Smith was concerned when he was leaving the office of special counsel that Donald Trump was going to come after him because Donald Trump vowed retribution over and over. So the lawyers simply volunteered their time to provide free legal advice to Jack Smith to know his rights, to know what Trump might do, how he can defend himself. That so upset Donald Trump, he signed his executive order to punish a law firm. And the result is he got so little press, so little pushback, that he got emboldened. And on Thursday, just a few days ago, he did something even more egregious, something, as the New York Times called, breathtaking escalation of the use of the federal government against a political enemy. And what he did here was with another law firm, very democratically connected, called Perkins Coie. It's based in Seattle, but big offices in New York, very well known, represents a lot of Democrats, liberal issues, liberal causes. In this case, Donald Trump did only take away their security clearance for lawyers who work in the classified documents, national security context. He did more. He also said that the government has to go through the various agencies, review any contracts they have with the Perkins law firm and end them. Also barred lawyers from Perkins from coming into various federal office buildings. And more than that, he ordered the investigation by his offices, by the Attorney General and the Department of Labor into the Perkins law firm to investigate them for potentially violating his ban on diversity programs. And why did he do all of this? Because the Perkins firm in 2016 represented Hillary Clinton, the Democratic National Committee, and this law firm was involved in retaining the firm that actually gave the Steele dossier. We all remember the Steele dossier from the 2016 campaign. It was drafted by Christopher Steele, former British intelligence analyst who I interviewed a few months ago. And his job was to collect data and evidence on whether Donald Trump had ties to Vladimir Putin or Russian actors. After what we've just lived through, it is clear Donald Trump has a connection with Russia. It is clear he might be an asset of it. But the Perkins firm just simply hired Christopher Steele to gather information about that. This so upset Donald Trump that now, all these years later, he signs an executive order. And in the executive order, he cites two lawyers, Mark Elias, who many of you know, great election lawyer, and Michael Sussman. In 2016, those two lawyers worked at the firm. They've left the firm years ago. But Donald Trump wants to punish a big DC democratically linked firm like he did with Berlin, now doing it with the Perkins firm. And he's doing it to send a message. And the message is very clear, that if you represent my political enemies, if you do any helping them, I'm going to come after you and use the full force of the government to hurt your business, end contracts with the government, and even investigate you. And by the way, when a law firm gets investigated, just because they have a whole legal staff doesn't mean it's free for them. They're going to have to hire outside counsel. That's going to cost them a lot of money, and they might get a lot of fines because the Trump DOJ and Department of Labor, they're going to trump up charges. They're clearly going to lie and say there are violations of some laws. And that is why the head of the American Bar Association, William Bay, slammed this in a statement, very concerning about the chilling effect it would have. He said lawyers must be free to represent clients and perform their ethical duty without fear of retribution. And he added, we reject the notion that the government can punish lawyers who represent certain clients or punish judges who rule certain ways. We cannot accept government actions that seek to tip the scales of justice in this manner. Mark Zaid, the national security lawyer who I mentioned earlier, was even more blunt and laid out exactly what is going on, because this is someone who's a practicing lawyer in the area of classified documents and national security, represents whistleblowers a great deal. He said what Trump's goals are. He said, by taking these actions against these major law firms, it is effectively sending a message to all the lawyers that you best not challenge this administration, or you or your lawyers or your clients will suffer. And he added, it's the most un-American thing I've ever seen. Again, the most un-American thing that he's seen. And the Perkins firm, by the way, is also the lead counsel in two big lawsuits against the Trump administration, challenging executive orders, including the Trump administration's ban on transgender Americans serving in our military. Now, that is not in the executive order cited by Trump. That's also part of it. So this is a much bigger issue. And I want people to understand that's why this deserves and demands much more coverage. Because if not, Trump will continue down this path. He's not just taking security clearance away from people he doesn't like anymore. He is now punishing law firms and sending a message to lawyers across the nation, especially at big firms, that if you help my political enemies, if you sue my administration, I'm going to make it hurt. I'm going to use the government to come after you. And this is exactly what Richard Nixon did in Watergate. In fact, in 1971, John Dean, who was then Richard Nixon's White House counsel, he wrote a famous, infamous memo to Richard Nixon about using, as he put it, to go after the political enemies. He wrote, this memorandum addresses the matter of how we can maximize the fact of our incumbency in dealing with persons known to be active in their opposition to our administration. Then John Dean added this infamous line, stated a bit more bluntly, it's about how we can use the available federal machinery to screw our political enemies. Yes, John Dean put that in writing, which is partly why he's disbarred. The idea of using the government to screw the political enemies of Richard Nixon, anybody who opposed the administration, that's what Trump is doing. And in the Nixon memo, it actually gave examples of what they could do and includes the idea of ending federal contracts to screw over their enemies, potentially investigating them, suing them, prosecuting them. Trump's doing all of that now. It's literally reading the 1971 memo and bringing it into life now, right here. What we're seeing from Trump, though, is worse than what Richard Nixon did. Richard Nixon did use the IRS to go after some political enemies, use the apparatus of government to pursue people, to gather intelligence on his political adversaries. He did not, though, go after law firms simply for representing people or his political enemies. That's what Trump is doing. And if there's not the pushback, I can't even imagine where this goes. But if we allow ourselves to imagine, it's going to be the prosecute attorneys for representing Democrats or people that Trump views as enemies, to literally criminally prosecute them, to shut their law firms down, to make a scenario and a climate where no lawyer is going to want to represent someone that Donald Trump doesn't like. And that helps him with his authoritarian dreams. That is what is so stunning that we're living through right now. That is why it is so important this gets more pressure, more coverage, so it gets more pressure. The Democratic leaders are talking about this issue. This goes right to the heart of our system. The idea, and I say this as a lawyer, not because I'm trying to protect lawyers, I'm trying to protect the best of what lawyers do, which is to protect our Constitution, protect the most vulnerable against those who want to use power like Donald Trump to punish political enemies for simply political speech or conduct he doesn't disagree with, that he disagrees with. This cannot be allowed to stand. This is how democratic republics get chipped away before we know it, like the frog boiling in the pot. It's over. So that's why I wanted to talk about this issue. I think it's so fundamentally important I hope you'll take notice of it. I just wrote about it on my Substack. You can check it out, the Dean's Report. It's free, the articles I write. I'll give you more detail, more links, so you can do some research on your own if you want to read more details. But again, what Donald Trump is doing is far worse than Richard Nixon, and he's only less than 2 months into the administration. Where we're going to be in 6 months or 9 months or a year from now, I shudder to think, because if we don't stand up now, we're going to go to a dark, dark place.